like, oh no, I love the video, by the way. I don't like uh, hypocrisy.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. This is
Well, that was
terrible.
part two of the series of vignettes. We don't know. As you can see, the characters seem to have deepened. Some of the dramatic elements that Osita remarked on is not occurring in the first set begin to percolate in the second set. Of course, there were a number of callbacks, a number of sort of parallels, you might say. Just out of curiosity, did anybody detect any parallels between the first set and the second set of vignettes in terms of what they were doing or what they were saying?
No.
Um, yeah, I mean the two that jumped out at me is she. I think I watched. I couldn't find anything labeled like either Spring or Episode Zero, but I'm pretty sure we watched the same thing. And in what I watched, she was talking about her job. I assume it's the same job, and they're also going to a wedding, but it was his wedding and not her wedding. Um, so I think those were the two parallels. Yeah, obvious parallels, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And I think so yeah, very good. Yeah, this time they were going to a wedding, and I first of all, I love the way it was shot. I mean, both set, but especially the second set. I mean, just like cinematography wise, it was just beautiful. But also, yeah, in the first set of vignettes, it was a wedding happening in Miami that was Irene's sisters. In this one, it was a wedding of Henry's relative, presumably a sibling. So same parallel. It was happening in New York where they live, but I mean, her concern was again, I I'm just like your girlfriend. I don't know if 15 years from now, when your sibling is looking at her wedding pictures, I'm just going to be some girl you dated and nobody even remembers. So, interestingly enough, the her perspective was that I never met your family really. And he said, well, that's because they all live in Miami or they all live in Florida. So again, there's the Florida connection. So they do have sort of a similarity in that regard. But then you also find out they've only been together for a year. So that's the length of the relationship. And you also find out that Henry's job, he works at a food truck. So that's what he does for a living. But here's the thing, the weddings and stuff, they're reinforcing the idea or the theme of love. And so if you recall in the first set of vignettes, one of them says, I love you, and the other says, yeah, you're an okay person, and they laugh. And then at the end of the first set of vignettes, it's reversed, where the opposite partner says it, and then they joke around. In this set of vignettes, so the idea is love, and so obviously weddings, stuff like that. But then in this set of vignettes, they actually say, I love you back to one another. But when they're saying it to one another, it's not during a tender moment, it's during a heated moment where he is being, again, very critical of her career decisions. Now, keep in mind, another tiny little plot has kind of found closure there. She got the promotion. They're offering her a full-time job. They're offering her benefits. She's going to be on salary. She's not going to be, hourly wage retail anymore. So it worked out. But nonetheless, I mean, it's interesting to see. It's like, well, we're talking seriously now, so we're going to be serious, even though they're not necessarily being tender. And in the moments when they're tender, that's when they're kind of jokey about their feelings, because it seems like they sort of inherently trust one another's affection and love towards them, despite the fact that, love is happening all around them. Everybody else around them is getting married. And then you come to find out, well, we've been together for a year. We've been living together for a year. And, the idea is for them to have a family. So again, a lot of things, again, quick series of vignettes. I mean, under 10 minutes, was it? But nonetheless, a lot of things come together that were introduced in the beginning. So there is a continuity here. There is a sense of cohesiveness. You can still get that with the vignettes, which I find interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't caught like a parallelism between the first and the second. For me, parallelism is like kind of like do like this. But yes, it does continue the story. Um, and I mean, I like it. Um, there was a little bit more of emotion, a little bit more of like ups and downs. Uh, and the end, they say that it's just 1 year of relation, which is interesting. I would have expected more, but it's like it was kind of like odd whether they have been like moving in like, I mean, they are living together for 1 year, but we don't know how long they have known each other. But I think I actually pay attention on the ringer. She has something there. I just don't know if it is like they are like married or not, but she has something in the finger. I'm like, that was coming up. Oh, Nancy disappeared. Oh, mag magician. Um, yeah, but I enjoy that there was more uh, emotion because I think like the perception of how our relationship was built up, it was more intense because it's not true that everything just kind of like always like easy. It's more like, up and down, and from time to time it's kind of like, oh, it's going really bad. But it was nice also to see that he was able to balance the spectrum of, even though I'm bad, still gonna recognize that I love you. And like we still were able to like have that humoristic way even when he was in a very uh, low point. If somebody died and he was kind of like very
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. There was that scene where, I mean, we see Henry crying, and again, it has to do with the death. And again, this is part of the, I think one of the better features of these vignettes is that they try to reveal things slowly and allow you to piece it together, the viewer. And so you gather that somebody's dead. You gather it's a crazy moment. I mean, they're both like Henry's in his pajamas just out in the park in public. So he's frantic. And she ran out in her pajamas with him, like to try to console him. And yeah, I think the implication is that like a sibling died. I think that's what the deal is. Not a parent. I think it's a sibling. And so again, you do see him at his completely most vulnerable. And look, we've seen Henry in previous vignettes looking disheveled out in public, but it's a little different. He's in his pajamas, um, and even in those moments, you see like their love for each other, but also again, you see the humor in it as well. Like she jokes with him to console him, and he apologizes for speaking crossly to her because he recognizes her good intention. I think that's an interesting moment in all these vignettes because prior to that, like, well, actually, I think that's the only time where you see any of them emote like that, like either one of them. Like Irene's pretty. I think the equivalent to Irene emoting like that is when she gets angry. Because do you remember that scene where they're on the way to the movie and Henry's rushing them because they're going to be late, but she wants to do something. Again, she's thinking about family, and perhaps that is a cultural value in Cuba, especially where she's like, your sister had us over for dinner the other night. We need to send her a card and express our gratitude. And Henry's just like, no, you don't. It's just my dumb sister. She made meatballs. Who cares? I want to see this movie. He's more, honed in on himself, and then she gets upset about that. So in both instances, the strong emotional outpouring is centered around family. And so I think that all wraps up together at the end when you find out that Henry's like, no, we're gonna have kids. We're gonna have a family.
Yeah, and that also goes back to what I was mentioning previously, and to theme is the difference in culture, like in South America. And that's me. Like it's very important to have like those tiny details, like, oh, this person did this, like send a thank you note, or like let me prepare like a cake next time we see each other. You're gonna like cook something for them in retribution. So it's I wouldn't say expect it, but we do it normally. But I don't think that's normal at least here in this country. Like I remember that like I'm huge in giving like thank you notes and thank you cards and stuff like that. So I do it all the time. And I normally feel like people is like, why are you doing it? Like, like it's crazy. Like, no, it's fine. Like, you shouldn't be like, no, I feel like I have to. So, yeah. There is also the cultural thing there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, the other thing to consider too is kind of like it's inverting traditional stereotypical gender roles. So you would expect that at a certain point, Henry would get really mad at her, and he'd be angry because he's the man, and he's like a kind of a bigger guy, and we've seen him get mad in previous again scenes where he's upset. But again, to Asita's point, he was always mad in the sense of being protective over her. But he doesn't get mad. He bawls his eyes out in public. And then Irene, her emotional outburst, it's not, and I'm not saying it's unjustified, but it's like she doesn't cry or weep, even though she's playing the role of the woman, which again stereotypically you would expect a woman to cry and a man to get mad, but in this case she gets really mad at him. And again, it's he's like kind of like taken aback by it. He doesn't quite grasp why she's upset. So it is, I think, an intentional reversal of antiquated gender stereotypes. But the point being is this: it still fits their characters overall throughout the span of every single scene. So, and then again, what's more, I think they're mirrors for women. So I think she's as protective over him as he is for her. And so again, I think you can see that suits them in a way that is, I would argue, very much contemporary, very much sort of this whole idea of integrating on an individual sort of couple molecular level, microcosmic level, exactly how it is that societies form, specifically, again, pluralistic societies, such as America.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was actually gonna.
Osita is next one.
Yeah. So I was gonna. Can you hear me? I guess I'll make sure. Yeah. Okay. So I was gonna. Yeah, I was gonna bring up that point also that Professor Manzi brought up.
Osita, I can
Um.
hear, but I can see that you're trying to speak.
Oh really? Hmm.
I can.
No, I hear
I
you.
can hear you.
I hear you well. Yeah, I can hear you
Oh
perfectly
really?
well. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not. Yeah. Not sure what else I can do. Um. Talk louder. Yeah, I was going to bring up the same point that Professor Manzi brought up, in that there is that you could really see, I guess, the cultural difference come out in the thank you card sort of argument, um, and I thought that was really interesting because it was sort of like a clash of cultures in a sense, and like, well, what do you do when they actually not necessarily butt heads, but yeah, there was some tension there. But I will say, going back to the theme of like protectiveness, um, it does seem like it does seem like going back to the theme of protectiveness in society, right? I guess one of the things that we get from a society is protection. I guess, strength in numbers and all of that. And so when you have like a society of two, I guess, and these two people, um, you can see how they both protect each other. I guess, for instance, like, for the argument about the salary, he was right. I mean, at least from my point of view, at least the way I see it is like, yeah, you go, at least for when I've had to argue about salary, I overshoot what I think I'm worth, and then we negotiate down. And that's kind of what you do. And so even though she was, resistant to that for, whatever reason, um, uh, there was still, if she didn't have him and she just went and took the 50,000, that would be a mistake. And I guess I'm assuming that she's going to eventually follow his advice and make a better decision, protect herself from being taken advantage of. Just like, you know, she protects him in a way, when his father passed. Um, you have that emotional, it's protection from, I guess, you know, trauma or grief sort of run amok, can be a danger to oneself. And so by her being there and having that, not only that shoulder to cry on, but having someone that you're comfortable enough that they can make a joke about, did my dad really, was he proud of me? Yeah, of course not. You're an animal. That's hilarious. And um, your best friends are the ones that you can like insult, right? So that level of closeness, I think, has a more quote unquote protective benefit than if it was just some therapist that he had no personal connection with or something like that. So I think for me, that's how I saw like the theme of protectiveness in society, kind of bringing it down to the most micro level of like a society of these two people kind of out into like a chaotic wilderness, trying to make it. But yeah.
Yeah, I like how you put that, like a chaotic wilderness, because again, perhaps the source of Henry's overprotectiveness is because he was born and raised in a place like New York City, where again things are very chaotic, and again there's just an extreme amount of diversity in such a way where it becomes, I think, for somebody like Henry, not a scary place, but a place where misunderstandings can happen often. And I think in the case of again him sort of defending her worth in terms of an annual income, yeah, I think you're right about that. I think that Henry's impetus there is sincere, and I believe that the idea is maybe this is why Irene really cares about him, because she sees his affection towards her as sincere, and he maybe helps establish her self-worth, because he's like, no, you are worth more than this, and maybe she doesn't see herself that way, but on some level she does, because she's aspiring and she is climbing the ranks regardless. But yeah, getting back to the whole again theme of society and how this all relates to it, it does seem as though again, laughing at some of the jokes in the recent string of vignettes, Henry, he's so out of touch with what she's passionate about. He calls him Tony Hilfiger. Like he doesn't even know. So you might make the argument, well, he doesn't really know that much about her in terms of like the details of her passion, but he nonetheless will vehemently like argue for her individual worth. And I think that sort of plays a role in their own relationship. Now, again, bringing it back to the broader context of society, it seems as though in order for this kind of relationship to happen, because again, going back to the whole idea of trying to capture these interstitials, what they're talking about is their involvement in various societal engagements. It could be career related. She's working for a major corporation. Again, he's working in the service industry. They're constantly eating at restaurants. They're plugged in to their overall society and their individual goals. And then the very things they talk about that bonds them, shows how plugged into the society they have to be to even have the basis for these conversations, and which in turn are the bases for their relationship strengthening, deepening. So again, the whole idea behind the selection of these particular series of vignettes, we don't know in general as a whole, was to kind of capture the individual, the microcosm within the broader societal context. One of the original topics for this theme was individual and society. And so this kind of, again, harkens back to that. I believe that was the second topic we did in this theme. So yeah, I do think it resonates. And I think the points Osita's bringing up were fantastic. Fernando brought up fantastic points. Luke lacking, but you'll get them next time. At any rate, are there any other sort of and again, we don't have to kind of get all conceptual here, but he won't even defend himself. Again, friends can make jokes about each other. You stay in the chat, you coward. Yeah, I guess the overall takeaway for me would be this. The film series is supposed to, as I said at the very top of all this, reflect the themes that come up, not just the topics themselves, but the themes that come up in discussion, the micro themes, things that students lash upon, and then we talk about, and maybe tangentially, but nonetheless pick up steam. And I believe that the film series has done that both the fall and in the spring. So I'm very pleased with that. I'm excited to continue it next semester. Who knows? Maybe over the summer we could do some film series screenings. I mean, there's no reason why we can't. So that's something to consider as well. See you later, Ava. Thanks for coming and your contributions. Joking. Thank you for coming for real. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the next string of them.
He actually was intending to speak.
Oh, you're back. Okay.
Back to,
I was going to say,
of course that happened. But one time I tried to talk.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I made a joke. Yeah.
I was just going to say about oh man, now I'm like blanking. Oh, about the Tony Hilfiger thing. So when she said that, or when he said that, I was like, well, that makes me think of, like, say you're with your parents or whatever, and you've told them about all this stuff in your life and they're not necessarily listening or whatever, but it's like, oh, the Tony Hilfiger thing. It's like, that's how they show they did listen, because they don't know what you're actually talking about, but they heard something, So like I feel like that's one of those things that like from my mom, for instance, my dad is Mexican and my mom is like white as can be. And my dad just never corrects her Spanish because at least she's trying, and so I see that as like the kind of acceptance of who they are, like, okay, well, they're trying to connect with me, so I'll connect with them. And instead of correcting them because I'm annoyed, I'll be like, well, they're, trying to connect. I can't remember what the relevance was, but it just made me think of that, like, connection between the like mini society, and then between like your friends, like you guys were talking about how you can be yourself with your friends, and that like, so like the differences between, say, work friends and like out of work friends or school friends and all that, the friends that you can completely be yourself with. Like when you are at work or school, you might find people that you can talk with, and so that's a society of its own. But then there's your like chosen group of people that you can totally be yourself with, that you have that shorthand, and even though you may not all think the same way, you laugh at the same things or whatever, and it's like, or have this kind of like mini chosen society. So I don't know how that's relevant. Well, whatever. Thanks for letting me talk.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you spoke up. Yeah, no, I think that's very relevant. A few things you said. So yeah, the first thing you said too, especially, I think it's really important to notice, because again, yeah, she doesn't get insulted. She doesn't say, you don't even know this big designer. I mean, I think you're spot on there. Like, she understands, she knows who this guy is, and that the fact that he's even throwing something out there, yeah, she appreciates it. And of course, he's doing that in the midst of this kind of a grand gesture of sorts, where he's like, with makeup. Sorry, I'm just getting called out. But yeah, so that's a really good point. She's, in a certain sense, instead of being insulted, perhaps she's maybe not charmed by it, but she's appreciative of it. And yeah, regarding the chosen society of sorts, where you find your friends and pick with them. Yeah, I think that goes back to something I was trying to get at earlier. So I'm glad you bring it up. Being vulnerable in front of other people. especially again, others who maybe at first blush don't seem like you'll be able to relate on that deep of a level because of vastly different cultures, but through other sort of societally formed things like one's sensibilities, like one's sense of what's humorous, a sense of humor. One is able to sort of, I guess, bridge the otherwise cultural gaps in lieu of a deeper sort of individual one-on-one understanding, or a friendship-based one, because they're clearly friends. They speak to each other like friends. I spoke about how Henry was chivalrous, but he speaks to her rather casually, like you would a friend. So I think those are both really, really astute observations, and I think they are the elements that add to I feel the charm of the characters themselves. Is that idea of, okay, well, yeah, I mean they're buds. I don't know how else to put it. And again, their friendship, their relationship is all the more pronounced when you set it against the backdrop of big families and big family events, and big New York City, and big issues like love and health, things along these lines, career. I think it becomes all the more pronounced.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I wanted to throw in there. First of all, I really liked actually Athena's sort of like parallel with like her parents of like, oh, just not even correcting them, just out of like, at least you're trying. Like I think that's a really sweet notion, and it's a good way to look at it. I did also want, actually, first of all, what I wanted to say was this has to be like the most emotionally mature couple ever. Like even if they do argue or whatever, like very like the whole argument about the paycheck or whatever, and how the guy was instantly like, you know what, that came out overprotective and overbearing. I'm so sorry, blah blah blah. And I'm like, that's never happens in real life. Usually, like it'll maybe like the next day the guy will be like, hey, you know what? I was wrong when what I said, like after sleeping on the couch or fighting all night or whatever. So I thought that was funny, but yeah, actually, like just speaking of like, hey, they're talking to each other as friends. That just brings me back to like the very first scene where they're playing the hey, if you got $1 million game, which is like that's such a friend game. That's such a like just a rhetorical question game. Is at least for me, it's something it's always like it's like that or like which would you rather do? Sort of like those stupid games. Like would you rather like punch a beehive or like jump in a shark with oceans or jump in an ocean with sharks or something like that. One of those stupid games. So it's kind of like, hey, $1 million, what would you do?
Beehive.
Beehive. Yeah, probably beehive.
Yeah.
Yeah, you never mess because the aquatic animal, that's their environment. You can't win. That's home turf. Like you can't like.
There's no EpiPen for shark bite.
Right. Exactly. But yeah, I think that was all I want. And yeah, I guess I just did want to like also call back and emphasize like I'm thinking back like how much family was brought up in this one. Maybe it wasn't the last one, but it feels like almost maybe not every scene, but it feels like family was a big focus of this one. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, just to respond briefly, I think you're right. Yeah, they play those kind of like almost like schoolyard playground games like that. Like again, what would you do? And again, Henry can't play. He's too pragmatic. He's too like concrete. Yeah, it seems to me like the big themes were love, family, and honestly food. I think food comes up in almost every scene. Either they're eating, Henry works at a food truck. They're talking about going on, the breakfast versus the dinner meeting. Maybe my favorite line of any of them is when he says he's only going to give him $75. instead of $200 because he didn't think the meal was appropriate for what he originally was intending to give them. So again, Henry's not focused on family. He's focused on, well, the meal for him, which is, I think, hilarious. But so yeah, I think food is a big theme. And of course, the bacon scene where he just kind of like, he's all overprotective of her. He loves her. And that's when they say, I love you back and forth. She's like, can I have your last piece of bacon? You just had 4. And he just doesn't think twice and pops it in his mouth. Again, so I think food is also like a feature of these vignettes. And you know, I don't think that's inappropriate. I mean, you think about family, what do you think about? At least, you know, I'm Italian. I think love and I think food. So that's, it all makes sense to me. But yeah, I also wanted to remark on something else that was said earlier. Again, this whole notion of, I suppose, I'll put it in Ava's terms, expanding one's chosen society, because that's kind of what they're doing here. Again, Henry and Irene, they're joining one another's families. Again, Henry, you know, went to Florida and dressed like, you know, her culture, and he loved it. And she's being invited into his, again, his family's wedding photos for one of his siblings. So it's, you know, this is cultural integration. Like this is what we're seeing in real time in the topic of yesterday's discussion. Only we're seeing it from the perspective of two, I mean, this might sound oxymoronic, but an individual couple, right? Not one individual versus another, but how two individuals are beginning to sort of, again, become one. So yeah, I wanted to bring all of that to everyone's attention. I think it was coming up in discussion, but just to you know, render it completely explicit. And also, yeah, I'm not sure. So do you think it was his father that died, or do you think it was his sibling? I honestly couldn't tell, and I think it was, you know, intentionally.
Actually, yeah. Yeah, I was actually confused
I think
when
it
I
was
said. Yeah, I couldn't tell because, like, she said, like, your mom and your dad are flying in, I thought.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it threw me off with the whole. Yeah, I guess an older brother might. That makes more sense now that I think about it.
Yeah, because
Or
when he talks about pride, you think it's an older relative. So maybe his grandpa? I don't know. Or an older brother.
Or an
Either.
uncle.
Or an uncle? Yeah, it
yeah,
could be an uncle. Yeah. Yeah. But I like that it's kind of vague like again, I think, you know, the film creators made a lot of those choices to try to leave things ambiguous and then slowly provide a little bit of detail, but not enough to really be like decisive. Because that's, again, getting back to something Fernando said earlier, that's kind of what life is. It's always kind of ambiguous. And that's why I really appreciate, again, the vignettes, because, or as I put them, the interstices or the interstitials. I mean, you know, I think when you're living life, everything feels like an interstitial. Everything feels like an in-between. Like we're always in between. And so, you know, when you can step back and look at a whole life, you can be like, oh yeah, here's the beginning, middle, and end. Here's the whole story. Or you could be like, if I want to compartmentalize, you know, my 20s, here's the whole story. But that's always in retrospect. That's always after the fact. But as you're living, you know, existentially, you know, I spoke earlier in the previous recording of the existential component of this film that I really appreciated, and I thought it did a great job of bringing out. I mean, that's more specifically what I was, you know, getting at. This idea of, again, I mean, it's very, and I brought up memories at the conclusion of the last discussion. Everything can kind of seem like just a series of vignettes. And yet it doesn't mean it's completely without unity, but it also doesn't mean that it's everything is like in a neat little bow. Here's my early life, here's my midlife, here's my late life. Like it doesn't feel like that when you're actually being human, when you're being a human being. What's up, Luke? Got some?
Well, just right now, you talking, it made me think about the first thing that I was talking about, the idea that we don't know. And it does seem that all the outside, the context is always blurred with everything that's going on in the two vignettes. So The important aspect is always the interpersonal relationship, and that's kind of, I guess, what a relationship is you build this bubble around you, and whether it's a friend or whether it's an intimate relationship, and when you're together, yeah, everything outside of that is blurred. It just falls away, and so then you get this coalesced picture. And so yeah, when they're talking about the death of a family member, you don't even know who it is, because you're just getting the picture of the bubble. And yeah, sorry, that's what it reminded me of when you were talking.
Yeah, the blending of the context. I think you're right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think oftentimes that's sort of how humans operate. I mean, there's so many aspects to our lives in terms of like different relationships we have, different goals, different actions, different opportunities, different circumstances. But it's not like you have them all perfectly compartmentalized in your mind. It's all kind of this blurred sort of context. And then, from that, you sort of lead your life. And you pull the details as necessary given whatever it is that you're up to. So yeah, I think the film does a great job of sort of conveying that. Again, the ambiguity, it's almost, I'm calling it intentional on behalf of the creators of the film, but it's almost unintentional when it comes to just, well, that's what it is to be the kind of organism we are. Yeah, I really appreciate that point too, because it's not like context ever goes away. It just deepens. It just furthers. And again, from what we understand, their context together has only been a year. It's a big year. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments? Yeah. Oh, Ava. She fooled me.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like,
For me,
so they were
like, okay,
together for a year and pretty much immediately moved in.
Yeah, I think that's what they suggested. Like they basically met each other, moved in. So I mean, yeah, going back to even Lucas's point, who knows if they moved in due to just necessity? Maybe they weren't romantically involved and they moved in together. I mean, that happens, right?
Yeah, definitely, especially in New York.
Exactly.
So that makes sense.
And again, if he's working a food truck and she's working retail, maybe they need to split the rent. And then a romantic relationship kind of developed from there. But I mean, ask yourself, consider previous relationships you've had. I mean, 1 year in, are you talking about having kids with chubby little fingers and however he put it? I mean,
No, not a year in now.
I was gonna call you out. I was gonna say, OC, I remember when we were, I mean, of course, we were like juniors in high school when we met, but like we did talk about kids. I know it was like stupid. It was like, oh, I don't think it was like kids with each other, but it was like children in general. And I'm just like, now that's like a terrifying thought. But it's just like, I guess we were like really young and like trying to impress each other with how mature we were or something. But I remember talking about it. But of course it was hypothetical, and I think it was like, because it was like over Facebook or something. It was just like, we were doing the 20 questions thing. Exactly, like you're trying to get to know someone, so you're just all these stupid questions. And I don't know, something about kids. Like I just remember that, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even think if we were starting a relationship now, like I could barely start thinking about that now. So I'm like, that's just some kind of weird overcompensation for like junior in high school thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and again, junior in high school versus again, Irene's in her 30s. I think Henry's supposed to be in his late 30s or early 40s. So maybe again, the kid got
40s.
Yeah, I think 40s. Yeah. So I mean that and again, we see how important family is to Irene. Again, it seems like family isn't that important to Henry until you see the scene about him coping with the death. That's cool that y'all know each other. I realize you guys know each other.
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I think I mean, I think what y'all are getting at are, important points to the film, because at the end of the day, again, nothing actually gets truly resolved because there were no actual, like, completely concrete problems to begin with. Again, such is the nature and kind of the playfulness of this form of cinema, these vignettes, is that because there is no clear plot, you're not beholden to the plot. We referenced sitcoms earlier, 90s sitcoms, and those things are so formulaic. But there's no real formula to what we just watched. So there wasn't like, okay, now we know what the problem is, now it will get resolved like this. We just had these vague senses of what they're kind of going through and working on. And then at the very end, it's kind of like, yeah, it's still all there, and maybe such is life. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, we've been talking for even longer than I intended. So I suppose we could wrap this up. If anybody has any final thoughts or opinions, I thought everybody's contributions were really great. And I really thank y'all for hanging in there with this conversation. Again, I love watching the films and showcasing them and introducing students to them. But my favorite part is talking about it, obviously. So I'm really thankful that y'all were here and contributed, and were attentive listeners, and contributed into the chats, as well as voicing your opinion, literally. Again, this has been the Philosophy and Film Series for the 2021 academic year. And yeah, we'll see what the next semester holds, and maybe we'll do one over the summer. Time will tell. But yeah, it's one of my favorite things. I'm a huge fan of cinema, and I think philosophy and cinema, they go hand in hand together, for a number of reasons. So yeah, thanks for coming out. Any final thoughts? Anybody? I don't mean to like be concluding it. I know I threw it out there and then I just continue to talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, not much besides like those who are here. Remember that you can always just join us also at the Dallas College Philosophy Conference. It would be fun. Yay. Um, and if you want to introduce even the notion of vignette or philosophical level, how these meeting impacted your life, like that, you can also try that. I know that we tend to have that effect on the students and faculty as a whole. So it's a common recurrence in as a topic, but it's a good one. So feel free to do that as well.
And yeah, and again, this will be up on YouTube, so feel free to check us out. Philosophy Club. I mean, if you all don't already know, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have our own website, YouTube channel, all that fun stuff. So yeah, I guess that'll do it.
Okay.
Thanks for coming out, everybody.
Thank you so much for being here, and
Think about it.
nice. Yeah, think. Okay.
Thank you.
See you.
Take care, y'all.